But this, obviously this week we are again in Luke chapter 2. And, the songs that we sang this morning were really good. Jesus be the center. And, I'm kind of spacing out on the one before that. But it's right up our alley today about Jesus kind of being the center of our lives. Now, I think at first glance it's not going to really become clear on how does that connect with what we're going to read this morning? But I think we're going to see that as we delve into it a little bit more and see what's going on here. So we're in chapter 2 again, and I think we're finishing up. No, we're not finishing up the chapter, but we'll be in 2, 22 through. We're going to read through 38, 22 through 38. Somebody just give us a really quick synopsis or a rundown of what happened last week. What did we see last week happen? Again, and the reason why I always want us to think about what happened last week, that this again is one continuous story, that it's not broken up into little parts or anything like that, but we're following Luke's story of the life of Jesus. So what happened last week? Does anybody remember? Yeah. Okay, so we had the announcement of peace with the coming of whom? Jesus. All right, excellent, excellent. So we're going to continue that here. So we've got Jesus, baby Jesus, remember, is picking up after the shepherds, Jesus being born, of our kind of knowledge of the purification laws. Jesus is probably 5 to 6 weeks years old. That doesn't make sense. 5 to 6 weeks old. There we go. 5 to 6 weeks old at this point. So he's still definitely an infant, and they go up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. So we got Mary, Joseph, and the infant Jesus going up to Jerusalem to present him at the temple to the Lord. So we've got the three of them here, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, meeting this man named Simeon in the temple. And what does it say? What does verse 25 say about him? Yeah, he's righteous and devout. So I guess to put that in simple terms, he's in good relationship with the Lord and with probably those fellow devout Jews around him. But not only that, we are told that he is waiting for, did your translation say, is it the consolation of Israel? Did your translation say anything else? Is that pretty much universal? Anybody else say anything different? Okay. The Okay. Read that again.
He was filled with the Holy Spirit and eagerly expected the Messiah to come and rescue Israel.
Okay, there we go. The same type of thing. That's a very good way of putting it. So he's waiting for that. He's waiting for the Messiah, and he's been told by the Spirit. What has he been told by the Spirit in verse 26? Okay, yep, that he's not going to die before he sees Christ. Now they also meet somebody else, and who else do they meet there in the temple? Anna, yes. And what has she been told is well, she hasn't been necessarily told something, but what happens in verse 38?
She gives thanks to God and speaks directly to Jesus.
Okay.
Said that they were looking forward to his coming.
Okay, to the redemption of Israel. Anybody else have that translated a different way? Is it about the same? Everybody's looking at Brianne. You got anything else over there? 38. Oh, caught her spacing off.
Waiting for the promised king to come and deliver Jerusalem.
Okay, there we go. So what do both of these people, both Anna and Simeon, what do both of them do? They both do the same thing here in this case. What do both of them do? Yeah, there we go. They acknowledge that this infant Jesus, this baby Jesus, is the Christ. And probably no one else has really done this to this point except possibly the shepherds are the ones who recognize Jesus, this baby Jesus, as the Messiah. That's a pretty big thing. This little infant baby Jesus, who really probably doesn't do anything but eat, sleep, and cry and go to the bathroom, they recognize him as the Messiah, as the Christ. Now let's pinpoint some of Simeon's words here a little bit more, because Simeon not only recognizes him as the Christ, but he says three things about him that we want to look at here this morning. The first of all is that Christ is a light for all people. All right? That kind of comes really from 30:31. Christ is a light for all people. That goes into salvation too in 29 and 30. And that's important because he picks that up in 32 as well as a light for revelation to the Gentiles, non-Jewish people. That's fairly new. In one sense, Isaiah talks about that. If you go back into the Old Testament, Isaiah talks about that a little bit, that the Messiah is going to come to Jews and non-Jews alike. But in general, the concept that this Messiah was going to come and be the deliverer for everybody and not just for the Jewish people was a big deal. Simeon is latching on to something that not many people, if anybody, was going to say then. And Luke is really going to take off with that when he gets into Acts. I don't know if we'll go there, but if you were to read Acts, Luke really builds on that the church, especially Paul, is big into, he's taking this gospel not just to the Jewish people, but to everybody, non-Jewish people alike. So Simeon picks up on that. Secondly, then, he says, moving down then into verse 34, that he is appointed, this child is appointed for the fall and the rising of many in Israel. Does somebody else have a way of putting that? Appointed for the fall and rising of many. That may be a better way of putting that. We'll look at Brianne again over there.
This child will be rejected by many in Israel and will be their undoing.
Okay, so that kind of that pulls in that opposing part, which is again kind of the third thing, is that not only is he going to be the cause of the rising and falling of many, but also that many are going to oppose him. When you think about that, that's kind of a disturbing thing to say about this little teeny baby. That this little teeny baby is going to be appointed for the rising and the falling of many, and that also a lot of people are going to oppose him. That's a pretty wild thing to say about a newborn baby. Everybody loves newborn babies. They're so cute and helpless and things, and yet here's Simeon saying there's more to this baby than meets the eye. That some are going to be opposed to him, and some are going to rise because of him, and some are going to fall because of him. So three very strong and even disturbing statements that Simeon says, probably the only person to recognize it at this point of what's going on here. So Simeon and Anna recognize that Jesus is the Messiah. This baby Jesus is the Messiah. He's the deliverer. Simeon goes into that a little bit more. They recognize that this baby was going to grow up and redeem people and save people and reconcile people, as we talked about, as we sang about this morning. Simeon also recognized that Jesus wasn't necessarily just this cute little baby boy, but that he was going to be divisive, that he was going to pit people against each other, pit people against him, and that people were going to oppose him right from the get-go. And that's a really strong statement to make. I can't quite find the words for how strong of a statement that is, but let's look into that a little bit more, and that's what we're going to talk about for the last 5 minutes or so. Is that Anna and Simeon recognize this little baby boy is the Christ, but they also recognize that he is going to be something much more than just a deliverer, in the broad sense of a term, as a rescuer, but he's going to do something much deeper and much more profound than that. So let's look at that. And I think Luke, as we think about this, as we think about what's going on here, as we think about how Simeon recognizes Jesus and how Anna recognizes Jesus,